So I think it's 8:30, and I think we should start. So good morning, everybody. I am Nina Gregor. I'm the director of the Peace Research Institute, and it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to Philosophers Hall. We are very pleased to organize this event together with a coalition of civil organizations in Norway, and in the context of the initiative Mitt oljefond, My Oil Fund. And while PRIO itself is not a part of this campaign, we are very delighted to be able to host today's event, because it highlights important and very timely debates. I can see more people coming. I'll just continue. You just come in and make yourself comfortable. So the management of the Government Pension Fund Global has been subject to guidelines since 2004, and there are two main ethical obligations in the management of the fund. First, the fund shall be managed in ways that seek to secure long-term value creation for current and future generations of Norwegians. And second, the fund shall not invest in companies that cause or contribute to serious violations of ethical norms. Now, managing one of the world's largest funds makes Norway an important foreign policy actor as well as a norm setter. And last fall, the Norwegian Parliament decided to put the Council on Ethics recommendations on observation exclusion on hold due to certain investments done by the fund. A public committee was appointed to review the ethical framework of the Government Pension Fund Global, and this review is still ongoing. And in this phase, there are important debates that should indeed be held to learn about how to balance the necessity and obligation to invest and the risks associated with investing in unacceptable companies. And Norway, like the rest of the world, is facing a challenging international environment and a deteriorated security situation. And this is happening at the time where rapid technological transformation is also taking place. And in parallel, the spectrum of dual-use technology is growing. An increasing number of companies that used to operate mostly in the civilian realm are now becoming important players in concrete or planned conflict scenarios. The distinction between exclusively civilian and exclusively military companies is increasingly blurred, raising dilemmas for investors such as the fund. Now, for years, PRIO has been working on issues that are highly relevant to these developments, such as international ethics, human rights, weapons and arms control regimes, and the consequences of weapons use in conflict. More recent research agendas at PRIO include ceasefire monitoring, conflict trends analysis, and international regulation of emerging technologies, including the use of artificial intelligence in the military and beyond. And we are, of course, always interested in new opportunities, to expand our collaboration with different partners and funders on these very topical issues. So PRIO is engaged in these research agendas, in seeking such collaborations, and in the debates like today, because we believe that better knowledge leads to better and more responsible decisions. And I really hope and trust that today's event will contribute to exactly that. So I look very much forward to today and the panel debate, and I will now give the floor to our moderator today, Astrid Menne-Schoner from Amnesty International Norway. So the floor is yours to take us through the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just going to stand here for a little bit because I'm going to sit down again. My name is Astrid Schoner. I work at Amnesty International Norway, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. A special thank you to Prio for hosting us and for everyone who's joined us, both here in the room and also digitally, from what I understand. Before we get started on today's panel conversation, I'd like to introduce Hinamura Morgan Cross. Hinamura is an activist, a survivor of the consequences of nuclear testing, and also a member of the Assembly of French Polynesia. And she is now going to tell her story, setting the tune for today's conversation. Hinamura.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this presentation. So I want to acknowledge that I'm deeply honored to be here in your country and to have the opportunity to speak about the communities in the world affected by nuclear weapons. My name is Hina Mweura, and today, the 5th March, is marks since 2022 the International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, established by United Nations. But it is also my son's birthday. He's turning, he's turning 3 today, and he really chose his day to be born. And last year I was in New York with Susie for the second MSP meeting of state parties of the Treaty on the Non-Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So again, I'm celebrating his birthday far away, but it's so important to be here for me because my struggle today is really for the next generation. So I'm pretty sure that when he will have the age to understand what is my job, he will be very proud of that. And I'm very proud to be a mom. My kids really shaped how I'm struggling today, how I have my strength to fight, because it's not easy every day. And so for many people, nuclear weapons are a strategic issue, but for our communities, it is our daily reality. Nuclear weapons are about human lives, health, lands, and generation. My second son is 3 years old, but I have an older one that is 14, a teenager. And I like to say that my second child is my miracle because when my first son was 1 year and a half, I was diagnosed with leukemia. So at this time in 2013, the doctor told me that I'm lucky to be already a mom because I will have not the chance to have another kids. But thanks God, since my treatment worked, my leukemia was dormant, so I was able to have a second child. So it's why he's my little miracle. And so today, it's been since March 2013, I'm dealing with a chronic myeloid leukemia. I'm fighting every day. I'm condemned to take a pill to make the leukemia dormant. But I have to confess that when I was 24 years old, it was okay for me to take the medication every day. And I asked my doctor, is it possible to die from this leukemia? And she told me, yes. And I said, how? And she said it's because the patient, the people, they stop taking their treatment. So at 24 years old, I really thought that they are stupid. How come you can stop your treatment when you know that you will die? And I was the one who was facing this question when I was 30 years old, because I was so exhausted by the treatment, living like you're 80 years old. And I'm not the only one in my family. It started with my grandparents, but they died during the 80s. And you have to be aware that the healthcare in French Polynesia are 30 years late compared to Europe. So at this time, we didn't know, we don't have the name of how they died. And then it continues with my grandmother. She had a thyroid cancer. She was 30 years old when the French state decided to choose French Polynesia to make their nuclear test. It was in 1966, just after they did in Algeria, I think less than 20 nuclear tests. They choose French Polynesia because we are very far, and also because we are very kind and very candid people. It's very hard today to see how my people were proud to be part of that. We had for decades some picture of the nuclear mushroom in our living room because we were proud. How come France has chosen us to be part of this amazing experimentation? We were proud of the General de Gaulle, that was the president of France, to come to Tahiti. We were dancing for him, offering some flower crown. And he said at this time, French Polynesia is starting a big development. But what development today? Sick people, generation of sick people, poisoned people, the environment destroyed. And my auntie, she had a thyroid cancer in the 90s and then a breast cancer. My mom and my sister has thyroid disease. But my testimony is something that is so common in French Polynesia and in other affected communities. It's why I decided to fight in 2018. It was late in my life because I was 30 years old. But to explain you why it was late, because I didn't knew that part of the history before that. I grew up in French school as French territory, and I learned at school that we have to be proud of the nuclear test because thanks to that, we have roads, we have school, we have TV, we are developed thanks to that. And in my mind, it was maybe 3 or 4 tests, and it was only tests. I explained myself. Like I thought that it was a man in a laboratory doing some tests. It was the image that I had. I never make a link between a nuclear bomb and a nuclear test. And in 2018, our Tahitian leader, Oscar Temaru, he tried to make a complaint for crime against humanity against all the French presidents during 1966 until 1996 for the 193 nuclear bombs that France detonated in our country. And as a 30 years old woman, I was very surprised to read that. And I was like, he's silly. It was just test. It's not a crime against humanity. So I was curious and I opened the newspaper and then I discovered, oh, it wasn't 3 to 4 tests. It was 193. How come I didn't knew that? And then also there was a sentence that was saying one of the tests was 150 more powerful than Hiroshima. So it was hard for me to read that because it was like, how come a test be a bomb 150? It took me a lot of time to realize what happened. And I was ashamed and angry of myself to not be aware of that. So I decided to raise awareness in my country. But I didn't feel that friends were listening to us. We're a French territory, but we still facing some the colonization, so they don't hear us. And I decided to go to United Nations to speak about my testimony and to talk about the consequences behind nuclear weapons. And it's how I met ICANN. And I'm very grateful because they give me a space since 2022 to speak about that with other affected communities. And it's why it's so important for me. And I'm very honored to be here because today we really have to break the technical language that surrounds nuclear weapons. The words like deterrence or the words like nuclear arsenal, we have to show you what is the humans that are behind those words, the consequences on the world, on the people, and the environment. And I'm very honored to be with the speakers because today financial decisions are never neutral. They shape the world we are choosing to build today, and they send a signal about what we consider acceptable for the future of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hinamura. Is it okay if I stand over here to speak a little bit, or would that make the microphones crash? Okay. So thank you so much for reminding us what today's topic is really all about, and about the human stories behind the words. That was very well put. So we're so happy to see how much interest there is for this topic. During the next hour, we'll try to figure out if the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, or the GPFG, or better known as the Oil Fund, should and could invest in our common savings in weapons that, through their normal use, violate fundamental humanitarian principles. What is Norway's and the fund's responsibility when it comes to investments in companies that develop, spread, or contribute to the use of such weapons? Before introducing our panel, I'm going to give a brief introduction on where we stand, because the ethical framework of the world's largest sovereign wealth fund is currently under review. We don't know what the results are going to be, and we might actually be looking at more of a reform than a modest review. An independent commission or committee has been granted the task, and their recommendations are due in October. They've been presented with several dilemmas and questions in their mandate, and several of those dilemmas concern us. We fear that the result might lead to a framework that is weakened instead of strengthened, that allows more unethical investments, more investments that are not in line with Norway's obligations according to international law or international humanitarian law, or even international standards for responsible business conduct. And this concerns us, obviously, which is the reason why we have the campaign called Mitt Oljefond, consisting of quite a few civil society actors here in Norway. And we call it Mitt Oljefond because the fund essentially belongs to the people of Norway and should be managed according to their expectations. So one of the dilemmas is the reason why we're here today. It rose from the fact that Norway buys weapons. As a purchaser of weapons needed security services and defense infrastructure, it can buy those services from companies that are also already excluded from the oil fund, because the same companies also produce nuclear weapons. So what is really asked with this dilemma is essentially, why can we not invest in, own a company that we already support by buying its products? And the wanted outcome is maybe something like, it seems to us that they're asking the Commission to find a way to really invest in companies that also produce nuclear arms. That is at least our fear. And that's also the reason why we're so many organizations who are organizing today's events. So the organizers today are the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, in Norway, the Norwegian People's Aid, Norwegian Physicians Against Nuclear Weapons, Save the Children Norway, No to Nuclear Weapons, the Norwegian Peace Council, Fellesutvalget for Palestina, and Amnesty International Norway. We fear for investments in companies producing nuclear weapons in and of itself, but we also fear that might put the entire weapons criteria of the ethical guidelines in play. Because up until now, the fund has not been able to invest in any company that, quote, develop or produce weapons or key components of weapons that violate fundamental humanitarian principles through their normal use. Such weapons include biological weapons, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, non-detectable fragments, incendiary weapons, blinding laser weapons, anti-personnel mines, and cluster munitions. I'm going to call these types of weapons controversial weapons from now on, because weapons that violate fundamental humanitarian principles through their normal use is quite a mouthful, so I hope you're okay with that. And yeah, as I said, we fear that the entire criteria might be in play, and that previously excluded companies based on this criteria might be welcomed back into the fund. What would that mean for the future of the fund? And if the criteria or the ethical guidelines are to change, how should the fund's investments in arms companies be regulated so that our savings avoid the risk of contributing to violations of international humanitarian law? These and more are questions for our excellent panel, who I'll introduce, and you can take a seat on the podium as I introduce you. So first up, Susie Snyder, Program Coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. You can sit here if you want. Susie is an expert on nuclear weapons, and for more than a decade, she has also coordinated the Don't Bank on the Bomb projects. Welcome, Susie. And then there's and then Steffen Kongstad, former ambassador with more than 40 years in the Foreign Service. He's been Norway's ambassador to the UN in Geneva and to the OSSE in Vienna. And he's also, and then, who were you were going to share a microphone? Was it you and Bruno?
Bruno. But we'll find a way.
Okay, yeah, but I can, you can go first, that's okay. So Bruno Oliveira Martins is the senior researcher here at PRIO and also a co-leader of their security and technology research group. His research focuses on the intersection between technological developments, security practices, and societal change. And then, last but not least, Johan H. Andresen, former chair of the Council on Ethics, investor and philanthropist, owner and director of the investment company Ferd. Welcome. All right. So help yourselves to water. My first question goes to you, Johan. I would really like you to kind of take us back to the basics and why we even had criteria for exclusions from the fund in the first place in general, and specifically why were weapons that violate fundamental humanitarian principles declared a kind of a no-go zone for investing in Norwegian savings?
Well, we didn't really have all these ethical guidelines in the beginning. They came along the way, as most things do, by the way, although there are milestones now and then. But there was a growing concern at the beginning of the 2000s that the normal management of the fund, which was supposed to be responsible, did not adequately consider the ethical risks of investing in certain products. Not only weapons, by the way. I think tobacco was actually... I've been in the tobacco business for 149 years, so self-insight is a good thing. So both tobacco and weaponry of different kinds were... there was raised a concern that Norway had actually signed on to treaties, conventions, for many of the weapons that you just mentioned, but we were still investing in companies that are producing them. And that is, at best, an inconsistency. Maybe it's actually unethical or irresponsible. So there was a lot of discussion around that. And then Graver Commission was set up in 2002, and actually passed into law in 2004, which is the main frame of today's guidelines. And they, of course, they added more things, beyond products, which is a separate category, which is important to understand. You have conduct and products. products are normally much easier, but maybe in this, as you mentioned, products will now come up again as contentious or even something to be negotiated, to be debated, and nuclear especially. By the way, I think the other weapons you mentioned are more, I think that they will hold, but the nuclear one, I would, if I were you, I would focus on those because that's where the battle's going to be. I mean, no pun intended. Yeah. So I will just mention one other thing that I think you need to keep in your mind because I was at the commission or the 2 Fridays ago, and it's clear that they're looking at this in at least 2 ways. One is the actual investment. What are we invested in? And how do we treat the communication? So how open are we? And when are we open? And these are linked, but they will be discussed separately. And if you want to take part in the debate, you also need to look at them separately. So when do we announce an extraction or an exclusion? How? And who does it? What's the detailed level of detail? Now it's the full disclosure, 12 pages, satellite pictures, links from here to eternity. Or could it be just a headline, we're out of company X? So, so these are 2 separate but still linked questions. And as far as I'm concerned, I was there for 8.5 years. I think it worked. I mean, I think we did wonderful things. Of course, I'm subjective, but most of the impact is never seen, simply because it happens in the dialogue between the Council on Ethics and the companies. Of course, that's mostly on the conduct side, so corruption, human rights, destroying the environment, etc. On the product side, it's more: are you producing it or are you not? So it's easier, except for the nuclear bomb, because we talked about the platforms. How contributing are you to actually nuclear weapons if you produce a submarine which sole purpose is to carry and deliver nuclear weapons? Where does the threshold go? That's just one. So anyway, I think the framework is good. I think it's possible to keep most of it, but the contentious part will be the last 10%, and I think that's the one you're fighting for, right? So to be quite clear about it.
That's very insightful and useful with some tips for further advocacy, and we'll follow up on a few things that you mentioned. But so just keeping the focus on nuclear weapons for now, Susie. In the mandate for the revision, it is stated, as a matter of fact, that nuclear weapons work as a deterrent to prevent war. Do they?
That would be such a great thing if it were based in evidence, right? But there is no evidence that shows that nuclear weapons work to prevent war. In fact, if you look, the countries that have nuclear weapons, 9 countries with nuclear weapons, have all been engaged in war consistently since they got nuclear weapons. So maybe it's the opposite. And maybe we should kind of challenge that assumption. I had when I was 8 years old, I had a teacher who said, you should never assume anything because it makes an ass out of you and me. And I was 8 years old and she used the word ass. I'm like, that was a big deal, right? But we really do have to challenge these assumptions. And the concept of nuclear deterrence, we see it's a lazy concept. It forgets all of the other things that have happened in the world that maybe have reduced tensions. It forgets that there's an international system of norms, regulations, the International Court of Justice, of agreements by which we can avoid and deal with conflict. It says there's this one magic thing. Nuclear weapons are not magic. We just heard from Hinawera, nuclear weapons cause catastrophic intergenerational harm. So we can't accept this assumption on its face value. We have to go deeper. We have to say, oh, so in order to prevent conflict, we have to remain ready and willing to cause mass murder for multiple generations with the primary impact on little girls, because it's little girls that are hurt the worst when nuclear weapons are used. Are we really saying that is the trade-off for a prevention of war that may or may not happen? Right? I think we really have to dig into this. And otherwise, we're just being lazy. And I don't want to be lazy. And I don't think people in Norway are lazy. And I don't think we accept that. And especially when you look at the future of the fund, when you look at what is the purpose of this fund, it is to provide for the future. So we have to be good stewards and create the future we want.
So well put. Bruno, like Susie mentioned, sometimes or a lot of the time, the humanitarian argument for banning controversial weapons might be a very strong one, but yet states might resist banning such weapons. Do you have any thoughts on the reasons for that?
Well, I think there is. It's mostly an utilitarian argument. Well, of course, as you mentioned, there is a number of reasons that make particular weapons prohibited, right? And then you've listed them, and this is because mostly they cause intergenerational damage, because they create unacceptable damage, and also because they are unable to distinguish between civilians and combatants. So kind of these are kind of the main reasons why a number of weapons, the ones that you've listed, are prohibited. Some countries are unwilling to extend these lists because they feel that the potential gains that they can have by having the weapons outweighs the humanitarian costs that are at stake, and this is a dynamic that fuels a logic of arms race, right? So kind of if you feel that there is some damage that can come out of these weapons, but still we choose to have these weapons, then most likely that will, or it's possible that your opponent thinks the same way, and this will give incentives for your opponent to do the same, and then back and forth. So kind of what we really need to try to achieve is a break in this arms race, right? Of course, there are also other dynamics at play, which is what in security studies we call the security dilemma, which is when you make yourself, when you face a given threat and you want to face that threat by acquiring weapons and becoming more powerful, you risk that your opponent will think the same way, and suddenly that opponent will also acquire weapons, and then suddenly you have a more powerful opponent than what you had. So kind of in this security dilemma is something that is something very logical for some state actors, but it's a logic where humanitarian concerns are not at play, unfortunately. So I think what needs to happen is more events like this one, where the humanitarian consequences of some of these logics are really displayed, so that we can exactly counter this utilitarian arguments that look at these equations as if this was only just about strategy or just about hard power. Like there is much more than that, and including from my perspective and from the perspective of many other people in the room, more efficient ways of achieving stability rather than promoting nuclear proliferation, because the logic of nuclear deterrence will just lead to more nuclear proliferation, right? If nuclear deterrence means that there will be no war between those in which the ones that have nuclear weapons participate, then if more countries had nuclear weapons, then there will be less war. But of course, we know that this is not the case. And if we have time, we can get a little bit more into that. So basically, yeah, I think that it's important that the humanitarian aspects are brought to the table. But when you ask me, why is it that this doesn't happen more often, it's because there are other types of logics that have been more dominant for some actors.
Thank you. So speaking on state incentives, Stefan, Norway is often talked about as a humanitarian superpower, involved in peace negotiations and also holding a prominent role in being an international driving force, really, in facilitating treaties for disarmament. In your view, do the fund's investment decisions and also ethical framework influence Norway's role internationally? Does investment policy in the fund influence our diplomatic credibility, so to say?
Yes, I do think so. The fund, with its ethical framework, as it has been, and guidelines, has largely been seen as representing a gold standard among sovereign wealth funds. And it has contributed to the image of Norway as a responsible actor. And I also think it has been generally positive for Norwegian foreign policy and clearly underpinned the credibility of Norwegian diplomacy. But as the fund is an important, or is part of the Norwegian international profile, it matters. And also, as Hinemora said, investment decisions, they have political impact. And in the international arena, Norway is Norway, whether it's a pension fund or it's an embassy or whatever it is. Norway is Norway. So it has an impact, definitely.
Mm. Okay, so I'm jumping back to you, Susie. Sure. Just to play on what Stefan just said, and how the fund's decisions have an impact. I'm also curious about the impact that the fund's decisions might have on other investors.
Sure.
You worked on the Don't Bank on the Bomb project for a long time, and I thought, sure, you have some thoughts on this. And also, as Johan mentioned, the exclusion decisions from the fund have been very, very open up until now. And how can that play or influence other investors, really?
So I always ask the question, like, who's got the bigger government pension fund? Is it Norway or Japan? And it's always like a little bit depending on the value of certain assets. But the Norwegian pension fund, because it is such a big actor in the field, it is, the first or second largest in the world. A lot of people look to it for guidance and also look to the fund's decisions for advice. So the Don't Bank on the Bomb project, for those of you who don't know, and why would you? It's a little bit niche, it's a project that works with the investment community and with companies to assess their investment policies and to talk about, are you exposed to nuclear weapon producers within your portfolio? And it also provides publicly accessible research and publicly available research on the companies that are involved in the production of nuclear weapons. So I've had conversations with the fund for now 12, 13, 14 years about the processes. And our explanation of what is a nuclear weapon producer is one of the key things. And Johan, you brought this up, I think it's really important. Like, when it comes to nuclear weapons, that's a big part of the conversation. What exactly do we mean by a nuclear weapon? Where is the line on a nuclear weapon? And with Don't Bank on the Bomb, we took a very strict and conservative approach to this. So we talked about what contributes explicitly and is designed explicitly to assist in the lethality and the kill potential of nuclear weapons, right? And so some things, like a lot of dual-use items that were not designed explicitly for nuclear weapons, we don't talk about. And we make reference to it because some investors are really curious and have very, very, very strict standards on their investments. So we've made sure that there's some information out there, but it's an NGO project, right? And there are companies whose job it is to provide this information directly to investors in order for them to make decisions on their guidance. And we also talk with them. So the question is, what happens with Norway's issue? And Norway has published its exclusions. And when Norway publishes its exclusions, the company that it has excluded stock drops. It is powerful. And we know that the exclusion is the final step in the process. So there has been a long discussion and this engagement within the sector, it's called this engagement with these companies. Can you not do this anymore? Right? It's not just cut them out, it's talk first. That exclusion is the final step. So we know and trust, and a lot of actors, I can think of at least 15 other investors who just directly follow the fund's guidance. It's cheaper too, let me be honest. I mean, if you're paying MSCI, you're paying ISS for data, and the pension fund is already putting it out there for everybody to use, well, I don't know, but that's a thing. So I think the transparency is really important because, especially for small investors, right? So we work with some small investors that are like small, church pension funds, and they have a really strict moral criteria, and they don't have the resources to hire the big firms, and so they look for guidance. Where can they get this information? They trust Norway. They trust Norway to provide this. To stop making that available, it might be a problem for them. So the process is really important. The transparency and the decision-making around it is really important because it does have sway and influence across the world. And so a change in this decision-making, in the way in which this happens, will have repercussions far beyond the borders of this country.
Johan, would you like to add on what happens in the financial markets?
Yes, of course, we're very proud that many other investors are following the advice of the Council on Ethics and the decisions of the bank. However, investors are, believe it or not, they are mostly rational people. So they are, and ethics is part of their framework, but it's not necessarily what makes them act initially. So when the decision is made and it's announced that the fund is out, every investor in the world knows that the other 15 are now going to dump their shares. So there's an immediate fall in the stock, but it's not necessarily last forever. And the product shares, they will fall most initially, but they will bounce back. So tobacco and weapons, they bounce back because they're profitable, and there are, wars happening, which means that the demand increases again. So you will not necessarily see this as a lasting effect. On conduct, it's actually a little bit different because there people see, okay, this company is actually conducting itself in an ethical manner, and that may not change for a long time unless they change the way they do business or change their management or get out of a country or something like that. So it's different. But don't bet on the fact that other people are following the fund. That, I think, is Stefan's point, that is the signaling effect is perhaps the strongest lasting effect beyond, it's stronger than the share price, I would say. Because it remains there. In a sense, forever. So if you Google a company diligently, if they ever were excluded, that will show up. They cannot ask Google for forgiveness. It'll be there forever. So that's, I think it's an important matter. I mean, there are chairmen or chairwomen who will have to face their kids when they come home why their company was excluded, and talk to their friends on the weekends. So it's actually, I mean, that effect I wouldn't underestimate it.
So if the new criteria were to end up somewhere in the middle, where the fund keeps excluding companies but without the transparency that we talked about, what would you think? Like, what would you expect the effect to be?
Right now, and I think we have to be honest, that the war in Ukraine and the unpredictability of Trump administration has I don't know, how shall I put this in the right context? People are saying, well, this is a new and uncertain regime, and we will have to look at our ethical considerations again. You had investors who were all in on weapons, and you had many who were all out. And then you had those who tried to sort of, steer within especially in the nuclear and the who's supplying what and who's accomplice or who's actually contributing to certain lethality. Those are the very sophisticated investors who try to sort of navigate that. They have moved. They are now they're now looking at dual use as an opportunity, not as a threat. And that is a huge shift. And that happened during the last, I would say, 2 years. So that's, and most of these investors, in a sense, unfortunately for the fund, are non-listed. So most of this development is happening outside the realm of the fund. But the signaling from the fund is still, I think, very important.
I just want to add on that because I think you're right. And I think that conduct-based criteria is quite important. And this is a really positive development from the fund. One thing, though, that I've noted when the fund publishes exclusions, it's like it goes through the criteria and stops at the first one and then publishes on that. But if you look at the number of the companies that have been excluded, there are severe concerns around conduct as well. And so, a more wholesome and fulsome transparency, if that is the way it's to continue, should include conduct-based concerns. There are a number of funds like they're under investigation or have been found guilty of high corruption, causing environmental damage, and of human rights abuses, of labor issues, like massive labor issues. So, it's not one or the other. And it's actually a combination that we need to look at. And again, engagement can do a lot, but there's a point where engagement also has to stop and you have to go to exclusion, otherwise you have nothing there's no weight in your engagement.
Thank you. Stefan, what's your thoughts on, if the fund were to open up for investments in nuclear weapons or companies that produce them, what would the consequences be for Norway's standing internationally and also for the fund?
Well, apart from all the technicalities about what is part of production of nuclear weapons, etc., I mean, there is another question to start with. The investment universe is vast. Why would you choose to invest in something so destructive and uncertain and, I would say, controversial as nuclear weapons? I think in a more political context, I mean, most countries in the world, they do not like nuclear weapons. And the majority of country states, they are states parties to the treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons. Why should Norway or the pension fund invest in something so controversial? Doesn't make much sense. So I think it will have an impact on Norwegian reputation and the possibilities we have to further and strengthen some of these things that defend and protect our national interests. So I think it will be very unfortunate from a foreign policy point of view.
Thank you. So why would you invest? Bruno, could you add a little bit on like, the global trends that you see when it comes to regulating and, treating weapons that are controversial?
Yeah, I think that this may sound a little bit obvious, but one criteria that the oil fund could follow is international law. And it sounds revolutionary, but there are a number of weapons that are prohibited, and this has been done either in conventions or in treaties that Norway is a part of. So it's, in a sense, is a no-brainer. There is also so kind of one way going forward should be to stick to that. Of course, international law is also adapting to accommodate new weapons, because there is a lot of technological developments that are generating new dynamics in the field. For example, there has been discussions in the Convention for Conventional Weapons about the possibility of prohibiting lethal autonomous weapon systems. One of Prio's researchers, Greg is there, has just returned from Geneva, where experts have been meeting to try to create a framework that would eventually lead to a treaty that prohibits lethal autonomous weapon systems, which basically are weapons that are fully autonomous. So kind of they have artificial intelligence that enable them to automatically and autonomously do the whole process from selecting the targeting, deciding to target, and then to target. So this is one of the trends that is happening. So kind of the technological developments, mostly in the field of artificial intelligence, they are creating new weapons that require new frameworks. So, of course, the principles of international law, international humanitarian law still apply, when it comes to what are the criteria by which a particular weapon should be prohibited. So they still apply, and they also apply in terms of deciding which criteria make a use of a weapon legal. Okay, what are the criteria, conditions, etc. So they still apply. But there are that trend. The other trend is precisely one that I had mentioned before, but that Johan also mentioned. It's the dual use. This is really extremely important. We used to talk about dual use as the dual use dilemma. So kind of the possibility that a particular technology has a very relevant civilian application. But it's a dilemma because that new technological development can lead to weaponization, right? And we've seen this in the neurosciences, in biotechnology, in all of that. Obviously, also in nuclear technology, but this debate happened a few decades ago. But we are I fully agree with you. We are in a phase now where many international actors, including the European Union, is looking at dual use as a possibility, and dual use technology has been explicitly promoted, funded, fostered, etc. And this causes a lot of problems. And we've seen the last couple of weeks in the US, for example, the drama in the Department of Defense, now called Department of War in the US, with the Anthropic AI system. And the fallout. So kind of this is, Anthropic and open AI. These are new, highly relevant actors in the military sphere as well. So when we think about the possibilities for investing in these types of companies, we need to understand that what counts as a company that may have a participation in the cycle that will lead to an acceptable use of a weapon, it's really expanding. So I think that the oil fund needs to monitor this very closely, because these developments are happening at a very fast pace.
That's very true. I mean, autonomous weapon systems, those were one of your concerns while leading the Council on Ethics. Could you well, elaborate a little bit on that. And
Yeah, well, I just by chance, I was in Davos in 2015. I was listening to Ken Roth, who was then heading Human Rights Watch. And one of my take-homes from Davos was autonomous weapons. I'd never even heard about it, but suddenly I was the chair of the Council on Ethics, and wow, this doesn't sound good. No, this is a completely new type of risk. So the first meeting, I remember, I just threw out this question that we had, and Cecilie Hellestveit, which I think many of you know, said, yeah, this is extremely important. So from there on, we actually started looking at it, but for the 8.5 years that I was in the Council on Ethics, we never, and even from you guys, we never got an idea of who was doing it, of the listed companies, listed. And as it turns out, it's all outside, it's all done by, in venture capital or private equity or funded through Pentagon or the Israeli government or whatever. So it's all under lids. Now it's popped up. And I just found a chilling quote yesterday. I was like, I know this is going on. I know in Ukraine, when I talk to people in Ukraine, I say, are you concerned about, that you're approaching autonomy and what type of consequences that will have for, call it humanity? And they say, yes, but our only concern is to survive now. And I think we have to sort of remember that, and in a sense, kind of respect it. This quote, there was a test done in Florida in January, where one operator was operating several drones at the same time. And the press release jubilantly says, autonomous mass isn't about flying more drones, Meyer said. It's about collapsing the kill chain until decision impact happens faster than the enemy can react. We have demonstrated that we can give American warfighters the edge. If you think about, you get my hair stand on end, collapse the kill chain. So basically, it's saying that you take human decision-making out of the loop, which, of course, again, if you were try to defend against autonomous weapons, perhaps the only way to do is with autonomous weapons. So you actually get, we're almost into the Matrix type of situations where the machines are actually fighting each other. And a very chilling, there are other experts on this, but if you don't have the capacity to defend yourself against a swarm of autonomous systems and you have nuclear weapons, will you then, is the threshold lowered to use them as the final response, or maybe even as a preemptive response? That's a very unnerving type of scenario. Is Pakistan developing autonomous weapons? I don't think so. I think they're relying on their nuclear capability as sort of the final threat. So that's, if you sort of play those scenarios out, they are not looking great. But we are at the foothills of autonomy, and it's yes, and it's becoming very, I would call it profitable. The demand now is, endless, unfortunately.
Scary, and the development is so fast, as you said.
Yeah.
But
there's one good thing though about Anthropic. You have to remember that Anthropic is funded by Google and Microsoft. So if you want to put pressure on Anthropic, the fund can do it. The
pressure should perhaps be on OpenAI and on ChatGPT, because they are the ones that stepped forward when Anthropic said,
True. Anthropic is still in the good.
But OpenAI, it's happening. This story is developing every day. Yeah. And OpenAI said, actually, we will put some guide rails in there. Yeah. They're following what Anthropic did. Yeah. It takes one to stand up, and others will stand up with them. If you don't have one that stands up, then nothing. Then everybody can walk free. So I think this story is It's been a crazy week, right?
Can I just add something very quick on this point? I think, and this is also, a very elementary point, but as long as conflicts proliferate, the chances for the acceleration of processes by which new weapons are developed and deployed are much higher. And, as we know, and as previous research on conflict trends show, the number of conflicts is really on the rise. And so the case of Ukraine is a very good example of this. It may be very exciting from a research and development perspective. All this pop-up drone workshops and this very fast process of developing increasingly autonomous drones and then putting them quickly in the battlefield. It may, from my perspective, is also, morally more understandable, because I think that Ukraine has faced highly illegal intervention and they have the right to defend themselves. But from the perspective of the discussions that we are raising today, it raises important questions, because we are jumping many steps that in peacetime can be observed and should be observed regarding guardrails, ethical guidelines. Of course, when the matter is survival, some of these things take a back seat. But I just want to emphasize that as long as conflicts are there, the chances for these things to take place are really there as well.
So looking at the weapons criteria, and just to... up until now, okay, so let me just start over. So up until now, the weapons criteria has been listing several weapons, right? Like I quoted earlier. How is there even a way to make a weapons criteria comprehensive enough so that it encompasses new weapons and dual-use weapons? And
we actually tried. Mestad-utvalget, which some of you may remember, which I was part of, which was the previous attempt to reform or to look at the guidelines. We actually proposed to put autonomous weapons in there as a separate line in the weapons criteria. As it turned out, the government did not include it in their proposal to the parliament because the Ministry of Defense said, well, we want to keep that sort of option open. And in a sense, they were right from a defense utilitarian point of view. But, well, even that was limited to autonomous weapons. That didn't sort of uncover all comprehensive new developments. Even that we didn't succeed in. So unfortunately, we gave it a sincere shot, and the whole committee was behind it, but we did not manage to get it through the government.
That's interesting.
I think, thank you for the effort first. And I think it's a really deep discussion, like how do you make policies, the rapid pace of technological development is far faster than we're able to create international regulation. Like, regulation is negotiation, it takes time, it takes expertise, and things are moving, right? So how do we create a space that is future-proof, right? And I think it goes back to the fundamental principles and making sure that we have fundamental principles. So when it comes to the fund, those fundamental humanitarian principles that include international humanitarian law, but also international human rights law, so that you have the law in times of conflict and not in conflict. We need a balance between those, because it may not be a declared conflict, but it may be leading to a conflict or assisting and facilitating the development of conflict. We need to have fundamental principles that include things like multilateral cooperation, right? Norway is great at multilateral cooperation, and that should be built in as well. And how do we support that? And that means building off of things like the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or the OECD guidelines on multilateral corporations. Right? We need to build off of what there is. And again, how are we future-proof? It's looking at principles, it's looking at conduct and product, but really being conscientious and doing significant human rights due diligence before investment, which takes time but it's not impossible. And it's making sure that we're concerned about the value chain and not the kill chain. Like that the kill chain, we're not looking at collapsing the kill chain, we're looking at addressing the whole value chain. And that is, it is not an easy challenge to where these guidelines can go, but it is not an impossible thing either. And there's more opportunity because of the amazing foundation that has been laid to do this. And I think we have to be very, very, very conscientious that when we talk about products, it is the product that we're concerned with, not who owns the product. Geographic exclusions are highly troubling, and they undermine those originating ethical and humanitarian principles.
Absolutely. Stefan, I want to also talk a little bit about types of weapons that are actually regulated and part of conventions that Norway is part of as well, specifically the conventions on anti-personnel mines and cluster munitions, and you've been instrumental in the processes for both of those. In your view, can Norway be part of those conventions and still have a sovereign wealth fund that invests in companies that produce them?
Well, my very clear answer to that would be no. It would be more than senseless to invest in something that you have agreed to prohibit for a number of good reasons. So that's a short answer to it.
Some other reasons, would you like to name them?
No, but again, it has to do with credibility, integrity, and if you want to promote certain standards, you want to prohibit certain things because the harm is unacceptable. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that you do that with one hand and with the other hand you invest in the production of such things. I mean, so, and it would be very difficult to promote certain things if you undermine your own behavior by investing in such things, yes.
But is it the fund's responsibility to kind of uphold Norway's international obligations?
Well, it's a political responsibility to have such guidelines that this is avoided, that it can't happen.
Right. Okay, so we're going to have to do a closing round. I would like all of you to give one advice. If this process that is now started ends up with an actual, ends up with a weapons criteria, let's hope it does. And what would your number one advice be for the future weapons criteria of the oil funds? Should I name one of you, or would anyone like to start? Maybe Bruno?
I cannot be too explicit, but I think what is important and what is perhaps different now than what it has been, in previous years, is how fast some things are changing. Well, some things are constant, others are changing, but the things that are changing, they really have the potential to cause raise new questions. And so I think I think it's difficult to come up with criteria that are really future-proof unless they are based on very clear ethical guidelines and legal guidelines. So that's the best way to secure to secure future developments. But this should also happen while those recent developments are really monitored. So it's really crucial that that the Council will keep a very close eye, through, inviting experts, promoting discussions, being out there, because the developments are really happening also in less conventional spaces, right? Like the cutting edge of technologies in sometimes in startups, in commercial companies. So this is a different scenario.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, I think we have to remember what started this process, and the argument for doing a reform of the guidelines now it was really the Caterpillar, call it decision, and the way it was handled. And of course, it's a one-off. So and it probably could have been avoided. I mean, if handled differently, with the same exclusion, with the same argument. But it was used as an excuse, or the reactions to the Caterpillar decision, it was used as an excuse to look at the system again. And the main argument was, we have all these very important technical software companies who are on a list, Google, Microsoft, Meta, etc. Of course, they're always on the list of the Council on Ethics because they're always doing something funky that you need to have a look at. But it doesn't mean that you exclude them, right? I mean, I never in my time was there any real decision we had no processes to actually try to exclude one of the the big seven, the magical seven, or whatever you call them. Of course, but we didn't look at them. Because they were doing. I mean, there was one company doing something in Myanmar, if you remember. Not have to mention names, but very algorithms going the wrong way, completely supporting the killing of the Rohingyas, or the genocide, basically. So we were aware of them, but that was the main excuse for looking at the whole thing, and then came up, Stoltenberg mentioned, by the way, there's an inconsistency. We're protected by the nuclear umbrella, but we're still not investing in it, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a bogus start of the whole thing. It lacks, I think, credibility, but the mandate is there. So the committee is working, and I think they will. If you look on the weapons side, I would say, well, it has worked actually quite well. And it's not an investment question. How much money are we not making? It's a moral question, basically. It's an ethical question. You can accept to be protected by nuclear weapons, but you don't have to invest in them. I mean, it's and the Graver Commission in 2002. They say that. I mean, it's not a difficult argument, but it's made into a kind of an opportunistic argument that and it's almost as it actually links to the Caterpillar thing. We have to do something to show the Americans that we are sort of playing along. I mean, and we have to remember the Trump administration will be gone, and if we make a decision now for the future management of the fund that is linked to certain reactions coming out of one single exclusion, I mean, you have to sort of protest against that. That's not a good argument. Huh? So I would, but I think the main thing that you're going to face is perhaps the threshold question, because we did introduce a threshold for coal, and that may have been a mistake in the sense that because now we accept that it's moral to have 30% coal. Okay, where does the threshold hold for nuclear? Is it 1% of the company's turnover? Is it 0.5%? Is it 5%? So I would really look at, be prepared for the threshold argument, because that's where it's going to come back. I'm certain. I'm not saying I recommend that it comes back. I'm saying you should be prepared to argue against it. It's a 1-0. It's a moral question.
Noted. Stefan?
Well, I think it's probably impossible to have a completely future-proof criteria and so on. But there will always be something that we haven't thought about. But I think it's important to build on the same framework that we have had. It's partly listing certain things that we can't invest in, but also that we have certain principles and saying that things that have certain effects will not be invested in. And then I agree with Bruno. We need very effective monitoring of what's happening, and a strong ethical commission too. And I think we must recognize that the fund is now so big that it can't hide it has an impact and it reflects on Norway, what the fund is doing. And this is taking place in a situation where there are some fundamental changes going on globally. And there is a need for different thinking, new thinking, and developing new partnerships and alliances, and that's also part of the picture.
It's very true. Thank you, Susie.
So this is a brilliant group of people. It's been an honor to be here. And I want to reaffirm something Astrid, you said at the beginning. The point of the fund is long-term value creation, right? It's about the long term. Short-term adjustments, quick movement is not in the interest of long-term value creation. It was set up because of moral and ethical principles. It's set up to reaffirm Norway's commitments under international law, international humanitarian law, international human rights law. Those are the underlying principles. It's about the long term. It's about the future that we want and that we want to earn money producing to protect our individual futures as well. Because that's what it is. It comes back to how are we earning? What are we profiting from? And as Hinwera said at the beginning, every investment is a choice. So we can choose the right way.
That is so true. Thank you so much. I don't know about you, but I would like to continue this conversation throughout the day. But unfortunately, we have to get on with our days. I'd like to thank everyone, all of you as well, for coming. Today's conversation shows us that this is certainly not an uncomplicated issue, and the task that the Commission has been set to solve is certainly not easy. But we also learned that it's very, very important, and we're very anxious to see what this whole process ends up with. And well, I think we are a lot of people in this room who are not really. None of us are going to sit back and wait to see what comes out of this. We are going to fight hard for the fund to be compliant with the laws, standards, conventions till the bitter end. As you know, Mitt Oljefond is a, well, I don't know if we can call it a campaign or a cooperation, but anyway, we have more events coming up, and there's actually another one coming up already on Wednesday, looking into what was mentioned here as well, the tech companies. So I'm hoping that you're all interested in hearing if the tech companies should be held to a different standard than other companies in the fund. So we'll meet again on March 11th at Jungs. The event is posted at the Mitt Oljefond webpage and also on Facebook. You can find it there. So yeah, with that, a special thanks to the panel, Susie Snyder, Johan Andresen, Steffen Kongstad, and Bruno Oliveira Martins, and also to Hinamura Morgan Cross for introducing today's topic. Thank you all so much for coming.